The turkey had barely been carved when my father put down his fork and cleared his throat. Everyone at the Thanksgiving table stopped talking. My mother looked nervous. My older brother Jake stared at his plate. My younger sister Emily was scrolling through her phone. I looked around the table and immediately knew something was wrong. My father only cleared his throat like that when he had already made a decision and wanted everyone else to accept it. He folded his napkin. Then he said, "We're selling the business." For a moment, nobody reacted. Then I smiled. That's great. I genuinely thought it was good news. Bennett Hardware had been in our family for nearly 40 years. My grandfather had started it with a single rented storefront and 2 shelves of construction supplies. My father had eventually expanded it into a regional construction supply company with warehouses across 3 states. And I had spent 15 years helping turn it into something much larger. I built the company's first online ordering system. I negotiated contracts with suppliers. I redesigned the warehouse system. I created the inventory software that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. When competitors started undercutting us, I found new markets. When our largest supplier went bankrupt, I spent 3 weeks traveling between warehouses to keep our deliveries moving. I had done everything my father asked, sometimes more. I had even turned down a job offer from another company because Dad told me the family business needed me. So when he said they were selling, I assumed there would be a discussion about the future. Maybe I would receive a position with the new owners. Maybe I would receive a portion of the sale. Maybe my brother and I would finally have some clarity about what happened after Dad retired. Instead, Dad looked directly at me. "You're getting nothing." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" He took a sip of water. "You're getting nothing from the sale." My smile disappeared. Across the table, Jake suddenly became very interested in his plate. Mom reached for her glass. Emily stopped scrolling. I looked at each of them. "How much is the business selling for?" Dad answered casually. 18 million. The room seemed to become smaller. 18 million? He nodded. The buyers signed the preliminary agreement last week. I stared at him. "And I'm getting nothing?" "Correct." "Why?" Dad looked almost annoyed that I had asked. "Because the business belongs to the family." I laughed once. "Exactly." He frowned. "So why am I not included?" "Because you don't own it." Those 5 words hit me harder than I expected. I had known my father could be difficult. I had known he favored Jake. But I had never imagined he would erase 15 years of my life with one sentence. "I've worked there since I was 21. You were paid below market. You accepted the salary. I worked weekends. You were part of the family business. I missed holidays. Everyone did. I personally built the online division. We all contributed." I stared at him. "No." My voice became quieter. "I contributed." Jake finally looked up. Dad immediately said, "Your brother is getting a portion because he's staying with the company." I turned toward Jake. "You're staying?" Jake shrugged. "Apparently." "Did you know about the sale?" He hesitated, then nodded. "How long?" Dad answered for him. "Several months." I felt something inside me crack. Several months. They had known for months. They had sat across from me at Sunday dinners. They had asked me to review quarterly numbers. They had let me continue working overtime. And nobody had told me. My mother finally spoke. "Don't make this into a betrayal." I looked at her. "What would you call it?" "Your father made a business decision. He made a family decision." "No." She shook her head. "It's business." I almost smiled. "Then why did you announce it at Thanksgiving?" She didn't answer. Because the truth was obvious. They had chosen Thanksgiving because they knew I wouldn't cause a scene. They thought family pressure would silence me. Dad leaned back. "You've always been too emotional about these things." I stared at him. "Emotional? You take everything personally. I gave this company 15 years. You were compensated. I gave up opportunities. That was your choice. I stayed because you told me Grandpa wanted me to." Dad's expression changed. Only slightly. But I noticed. "What?" He looked away. "Nothing." "No." I leaned forward. "What did you just remember?" "You're imagining things." I looked at Mom. She wouldn't look at me. Then I looked at Jake. He was pale. Suddenly, the dinner wasn't about the sale. It was about something they weren't telling me. I stood. "How much is Jake getting?" Dad didn't answer. "How much?" Jake finally said. 2 million. I stared at him. 2 million. He nodded. I looked at Dad. "And me?" "Nothing." My throat tightened. "Why?" Dad's answer was immediate. "Because Jake has earned it." I almost laughed. "Jake has worked here for 3 years. He's been loyal." "Loyal?" I looked at Jake. You spent the first year playing golf with suppliers. He looked offended. That's part of networking. I shook my head. And I spent 15 years building the company. Dad's face hardened. Enough. No. For the first time in my life, I didn't care about keeping the peace. You want to sell the company for 18 million? Fine. I pointed at my father. But don't sit here and tell me I contributed nothing. You didn't own anything. Maybe. I paused. But I know exactly what I built. Dad stood. This conversation is over. Fine. I picked up my coat. Mom stared at me. Where are you going? Home. It's Thanksgiving. I know. She looked hurt. You would leave your family on Thanksgiving? I looked at her. You left me at the table first. Nobody spoke. I walked out. The cold November air hit my face. I sat in my car, but didn't start the engine. I just stared through the windshield. My hands were shaking. I had spent years believing that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I had believed my father would one day say, "You helped build this." Instead, he had said, "You're getting nothing." I drove home. I didn't sleep. At 2:17 in the morning, I opened an old storage box. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof. Maybe closure. Maybe something that would tell me I hadn't imagined the last 15 years. Inside were old invoices, photographs, tax documents, supplier contracts, handwritten notes from Grandpa. I started sorting through them. Then I found an envelope. My name was written across the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grandpa's. My heart began pounding. I opened it. Inside was a copy of an old agreement. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. My hands started shaking. There were ownership percentages, transfer restrictions, beneficiary clauses, and one section that made me stop breathing. My grandfather had never intended for my father to own the entire business. He had divided the company into shares. My father had received control. My mother had received a percentage. Jake had eventually been promised a smaller portion. But I had been given something far more important. A controlling stake that had been placed in a protected family trust. The document stated that the shares would transfer to me when I reached 35. I was 36. I read that sentence again. Then again. I looked at the date. The transfer should have happened the previous year. But it hadn't. My father had never told me. I grabbed my laptop. I searched the company's public filings. My name wasn't listed. I checked the corporate records I had access to. Nothing. Then I found another document. A transfer request. It had been prepared, but never filed. At the bottom was my father's signature. I stared at it. He had known. He had always known. My father hadn't simply forgotten my inheritance. He had hidden it. I sat back in my chair. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I wasn't angry. I was completely calm. Because I finally understood why Dad had been so confident when he said I was getting nothing. He believed I didn't know what Grandpa had left me. He believed 15 years of loyalty had made me predictable. He believed I would walk away. He had made one enormous mistake. He had assumed I knew nothing. I picked up my phone. The first call I made was to a corporate attorney. When she answered, I said, "I need you to look at something." I emailed her the documents. There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "Where did you get this?" "My grandfather." "Is this original?" "Yes." She took a breath. "If this document is authentic, your father cannot complete that sale without your authorization." I stared at the wall. "Are you sure?" "Very." "What happens now?" She answered calmly. "Now we find out why your father thought he could sell a company he doesn't fully own." I looked at the photograph of Grandpa sitting behind the original store counter. For years, I had thought my father had taken everything my grandfather built and passed it to Jake. Now I realized something. Dad hadn't just underestimated me. He had forgotten that Grandpa had planned for exactly this kind of situation. And for the first time since that Thanksgiving dinner, I smiled. My father had announced, "We're selling the business. You're getting nothing." He had no idea that the one person standing between him and $18 million was the daughter he had just dismissed. The next morning, I put the documents into a folder. Then I walked into the same office where I had spent 15 years working for my family. This time, I wasn't going there as an employee. I was going there as an owner. The next morning, I arrived at Bennett Hardware before everyone else. The parking lot was nearly empty. For 15 years, I had driven through those gates as an employee. That morning, everything felt different. I parked in my usual spot, walked through the glass doors, and headed toward the executive offices. The receptionist looked surprised. "You're here early." "I have a meeting with my father." She nodded. "He hasn't arrived yet." "That's fine." I sat in the waiting area. For once, I wasn't nervous. My attorney had spent most of the night reviewing the documents. She had confirmed what I already suspected. The ownership agreement was valid. The trust had been properly established. My grandfather's signature had been witnessed, and the transfer condition had been met when I turned 35. My father had no legal authority to sell the company without my approval. There was one more detail. My attorney had discovered that the company records had been altered after Grandpa died. My father's name had been listed as the sole controlling owner. Someone had removed the trust information from the internal corporate records. That wasn't an accident. That was concealment. At 8:17, Dad walked through the front doors. He saw me. His expression immediately changed. "What are you doing here? We need to talk." "About what?" I placed the folder on his desk. "About the sale." He glanced at it. "I already told you." "I know." "Then there's nothing to discuss." I pushed the folder toward him. "Open it." He didn't. "What's this?" "Grandpa's ownership agreement." His face changed. Just for a second. But I saw it. He knew exactly what it was. "You shouldn't have that." I leaned back. "Why?" "Because it's old." "Old doesn't mean invalid." He picked it up. His hands were suddenly unsteady. He flipped through the pages, then stopped. "You don't understand this." "I understand enough." "You think this gives you control?" "My attorney says it does." He slammed the folder onto the desk. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly when he signed that. He was thinking clearly enough to have it witnessed. He changed his mind." "Where's the amendment?" Dad went silent. I waited. "Where's the amendment?" He looked away. "There isn't one." "Exactly." The door opened. My attorney walked in. Dad stared at her. "Who are you?" "Her counsel." She placed another folder on the desk. "I'd like to discuss the proposed sale." Dad stood. "This is private family business." My attorney smiled politely.